Is Jon Jones going to run through Stipe Miocic, or is there more to this fight than we're thinking?
There's no one quite like Jon who was able to do what Jon has done.
His last 16 fights have been for a UFC championship. 16.
The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this could be a different fight than what we expect.
Jon wins. What happens next? Do you think is the most likely outcome? What's up, everybody? LauraSanko here. As always, I am joined by Dean Thomas, and we're going to talk a little bit of UFC 309, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Wow, we're finally getting it. But before we get to all that, Dean, I'm excited to tell you that we have a submission. We have a fan submission to react to at the end of this. Very excited to hear what this gentleman has to say. We want to hear more of that though, guys. Okay, so again, for 310, send in your submissions to oneononecombatsports@gmail.com and you'll get included in these videos, and we love interacting with you. So send in your submissions. All right, Dean.
Yes.
It's finally happening. Listen, it's here now, and now I'm excited about it. There was maybe a minute where I was like, what are we doing? But it's here, it's what we got, and I'm pretty pumped for it. And I think there's actually more nuance to this than perhaps some people are giving it.
I think so too. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this could be a different fight than what we expect. On paper, we see two guys, and then when you kind of add some things, you go, okay, Jon Jones is going to kill him. But I think this could be a different fight than what we expect. But I got to tell you this, Laura, and you were in Vegas over the weekend as well.
I was.
So seeing Jon Jones at a UFC at the Apex was different. It was surreal, and it brought some hope to me for Jon Jones's place in the UFC. Mm-hmm. Because Jon Jones always seems so outside of the UFC. Mm-hmm. Like, he doesn't fight often. There was a time where he was
around.
Yeah, he's not around. There was a time where he was fully engaged, and then just the last couple of years, he seems so off and just not a part of the UFC, like as if he was above us. You know where Conor lives? Like he wasn't where Conor lives.
I don't know.
Yeah. He wasn't exactly where Conor lives, but he was different.
Yeah.
And seeing him at the UFC and to get embraced and the love that he got, and for him to show love back.
Yeah.
Like, he was showing love back. It was a good place, and I loved it. I love to see Jon Jones at UFCs giving love to the UFC. I love to see that.
I'm completely agree with you, and it was really cool. When we were sitting there calling the fights, one of the producers got in her ears and said, "Hey, just FYI, just got word that Jon Jones is gonna come in a little bit, and he wants to it was told us that he wants to be around the atmosphere. He wants to be near fighting." And after we were done, he took his shoes off, and after the whole show was wrapped, obviously, took his shoes off, got in the octagon, kind of walked around a little bit. He didn't shadow box or anything like that. He was just kind of like sauntering around and taking it all in and kind of bouncing
touching his feet to the canvas.
Yeah, bouncing off the fence a little bit.
Yes, that's a real thing. That's why I don't take my shoes off when I go in there. I don't take my shoes and socks off. My feet never hit the canvas floor, because there's something about that feeling that it brings you back to the fight. Yeah. And for Jon Jones to take his shoes off and probably his socks and get his feet on that canvas, it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Barefoot Jon Jones is a real thing. That was really cool. Seeing him was really cool. Seeing people's reaction to him was really cool. And on a totally personal, selfish note, it's not like I know Jon well, but I've interviewed him a number of times, and we've exchanged like a handful of Instagram messages, just like responding to each other's posts, but literally like maybe one every 6 months. And it was really nice of him. He literally made a point to wait till I was done. As soon as I got off air, put my headset down, I got this big tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, gave me a big old hug, and he said, "I'm just so proud of what you have done in the last couple of years, and just couldn't be happier for your success." So I don't know. It's a side of Jon Jones that people don't maybe hear about that often or get to see that often. And I've I've always enjoyed my personal interactions with him. So, I mean, it's not the full picture, but he's a great guy to me. So
He's a charming individual,
he is, yeah.
and I hope just that doesn't mean that he gets arrested before the fight.
Don't even say it, Dean. Why'd you have to put that out there?
I don't know. It was like when Venkman said the puff marshmallow man. It was just thinking it. It just had to come out, right? It was like I just had to say it. I was thinking it.
Is Jon Jones your GOAT? Do you think he's the GOAT?
There's something about his mystique that makes him the GOAT. But when I think of the GOAT in terms of skill wise, because I can't separate skill with all the other things. Like
Yeah.
skill for me is it. And when I think about skill, DJ is the GOAT.
Demetrius Johnson, yeah.
Yeah. But when you take into account everything, everything, Jon is the GOAT. There's no one like quite like Jon who was able to do what Jon has done on the level that he's done it at in front of the people that he's done it in front of. Because that too is an important thing that we have to take into account. Like GSP couldn't have done what Jon did.
Yeah.
And GSP is a great martial art. And I'm not even sure Demetrius could have done it, which is why Demetrius is like, yo, get me out of the UFC. I just want to fight and be great. But there's a difference between fighting and being great and fighting and being great in front of the people at the UFC. There's a big difference in that. And you see it every week when fighters choke because they can't do it. But Jon doesn't, he never chokes. And there's something to that.
His last 16 fights have been for a UFC championship. 16. It's wild.
Insane. It's insane. 16 fights fighting the next best guy in your division.
Yeah. And
that's
time
crazy.
after time after time after time. I mean, we get so, I don't know. At least I do, I guess because of the business we're in. I get kind of jaded with numbers sometimes because we are constantly cherry picking the best stats for every fighter for every fight. Because that's what allows us to do our job, to hype up the fight and to get people to understand who it is that they are tuning in to see. So sometimes when you say it that often, it loses its meaning. And it took me a second to sit back and think about that, right? 16 fights for a UFC championship in a row.
I don't think I can tell you right now, there's no one else. I can't think of anyone else who could have done that.
No.
I can't think of anybody else. Everybody falls apart. Everybody does.
Yeah.
For whatever the reason is, whether it's the pressure of being champ, and I'm not saying he hasn't fallen apart. Like it's evident that he's fallen apart at times.
It just hasn't been inside the octagon.
Yeah, he just still shows up to fight and performs.
Yeah.
Which is insane to me, knowing how hard it is what we do and how much psychological and emotional effort that takes. And he's still able to go out there and blend it all together with his physical attributes and put together these wins and runs against the guys he's doing it to. It's amazing.
Yeah, he is a one-on-one. He is a generational individual for this sport. It's interesting in this context, though. Obviously, there's so many X factors to talk about, and I don't want to go too far into this video without mentioning Stipe Miocic, who is the consensus greatest heavyweight of all time. And yes, it's been a 3.5-year layoff. And yes, he's coming off a loss where he took a really bad knockout to Francis Ngannou. And I feel like sometimes we don't talk necessarily enough about that for obvious reasons. But all that aside, he is still the greatest heavyweight, consensus greatest heavyweight of all time. And I guess we can jump right into some of the X's and O's, as much as we can even talk about the X's and O's, given that we have 2 minutes of fight time on one guy for the last 4 years. The analysis is a little tricky on this one. He does possess a skill set that, in particular at heavyweight, could be challenging to Jon Jones. And it's interesting to me that the odds are where they are and that people are talking the way they're talking. Now, I rarely do this in a video, but I'll be honest, I'm picking Jon Jones, okay? I think Jon Jones is going to win this fight. I'll just tell you that. But the line that says Jon Jones is a -750 favorite is is so heavy-handed to me because you have to appreciate who Stipe Miocic is, what his skill set is, and it's not like he's just been lollygagging for the last 3.5 years. He's been training. He's an active firefighter using his body on a daily basis. I'm not sure. I'm just rambling. I'm not forming a
Yeah.
question as of yet, but like, I just I feel like he's got some skills that could really challenge John. And the fight that made me go, oh, was the Dominic Reyes fight. Because Dominic Reyes took it to Jon Jones and he looked very uncomfortable in certain parts of that fight. Obviously not in that weight class anymore. Obviously a lot of time has passed. Can Stipe produce that level of volume consistently? I don't know, but it's a thing to talk about.
Well, here's the thing too. I helped come up with a game plan when Thiago Santos fought
Did
Jon
you?
Jones.
This is why
Yeah.
we pay you the
So y'all pay
gazillions
me
of
the big bucks.
dollars
I
that
helped
we
come up
pay
with the
you.
game plan. And one thing that I noticed about, I mean, John has a lot of tendencies. He really does. He's very good at a lot of things, but he has a lot of tendencies. And one thing that we know about him in terms of like his just pure boxing, he doesn't box all that great.
No.
So for Thiago Santos, who also doesn't box all that great, but he's more explosive, was that we were like whenever John throws a punch, you got to come back with three over
Mm.
the top, over and under. Bop, 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 bop. Stipe is very capable of doing that. And Stipe has a style. We talk about his age being 43. So the 3-year layoff is probably good for a guy like Stipe
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't need the attention. He's older. He doesn't need the attention. He doesn't need the idea of going out there and getting that act
Getting
and getting
banged
that.
up on a
Yeah,
daily
yeah.
basis. Yeah.
So I think his body's going to be healed up, which is great. Now, for him to go out there, he has a skill set that really ages well for heavyweight.
Yes, he does.
Straight boxing, not a
Heavy
lot of
punches.
kicks, and he can wrestle. Like, and he probably wrestles well on top and, can stop shots and just wrestle and disengage. That type of skill set ages well for a heavyweight. And he moves his feet pretty well too. As long as he can still move his feet laterally side to side and and make up for some of the length that he's going to have at a disadvantage in terms of being able to push forward, go side to side and push forward and throw punches and combinations. I think Stipe can do pretty well because John is not a bully type fighter,
No,
which
he's
can make
not.
this interesting.
I know. And not only is he not a bully type fighter, um, it, he does, I will say this, he bullies people, but it is only with his aura and his presence. He's
Right.
not bullying them with volume. He's not bullying them with powerful, big punches. It's he created this, rightly so, this reputation, this mystique that he just forces guys to freeze at his preferred range. So in that sense, it's like he is the one in control bullying, but it's not bullying in the fashion that we normally talk about it, right? It is, I'm Jon Jones and I'm here and I can touch you and you can't touch me. And honestly, when I was breaking down Carlos Prates' striking for the last card, there's elements of that. I was like, this is kind of like how it is for Jon Jones because there's just such an enormous advantage that you have when you are a striker with an 84.5-inch reach and legs to match it.
Yeah, I always tell people size isn't as big of an advantage as you think it is, but length is.
Yeah.
Length is because when you can hit
I'm trying
somebody
to
and
be
they
an
can't
adult
see.
here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, try to be an adult, okay? All right. Can you get your mind out the gutter?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was just imagining
Can
so
can can you behave? Oh
I'm
my God.
sorry. I'm sorry.
With so much going on in the world right now,
And
you
you
can't
said it
behave
so
yourself.
you said it so straight faced, so professionally, not a
No.
glimmer, not a giggle. And I brought
But
us
now
all to
but now
myself.
that you giggling, I can't help but into my own head giggling about the
I
same
dragged us
dumb
into the
stuff I
gutter. I'm
just
so
said.
sorry, you guys. I need to grow up. Okay, go ahead. Length. Yep.
Yeah, but it's a huge advantage. And
Yeah.
this is why I'm saying Stipe is going to have to do his job on his feet because he can cover up some of that distance in and out, side to side, creating angles, seeing if he can catch John slipping. I mean, he's going to have to, and he's going to have to throw in combination.
Mhm.
But I think he's got a skill set that ages well. as long as he's been active and moving his body, I think that if he could put together a good enough camp and do things to disrupt Jon and be physical with Jon, I mean, he's going to match Jon obviously in size. If he can be physical with Jon, I think this fight can be really interesting. I don't think it's going to be as one-sided as we think it's going to be.
I agree, and part of that is because this is the fight where the length that you're talking about is the least pronounced. Stipe is taller and longer than Alexander Gustafsson, and that's the closest one to it. Alex Gustafsson is 6'5", Stipe is 6'6". I realize it's not a huge
Is
difference.
Stipe 6'6"? No.
6'6".
Stipe is 6'6"?
Yes, I will see. Now you're making me question it, but I will double check.
He just seems like he has
Dang
like
it,
short
it says
limbs.
6'4" on my spreadsheet. Never mind,
Okay.
guys.
Okay, but
Somewhere had him at 6'6".
Even still, he just seems like he has short limbs, like a long torso
He's got a
and
long
short
torso and
limbs.
short legs, but I think he's got relatively long arms to where it's not, yeah, 80-inch reach. So
Okay.
still a 4.5-inch reach, but compared to, I mean, when Jon fought DC, he had a 12-inch reach advantage. That's that's ludicrous. That is absolutely ludicrous.
No wonder DC was struggling, boy. DC could not get in.
How could you ever? How could you ever? But my point, our point is that's such a huge advantage he has held over so many of his opponents, and it is much more mitigated in this particular matchup.
I think also too, where Jon might have an advantage, believe it or not, is in the grappling, in the transitional grappling. And this is where I think Stipe's biggest struggle might be in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is kind of something that you need to be in the game for. That is transitional grappling. And Jon is good at that. I mean, Jon snatch your neck up quick. I mean, when you think about his choke game from guys like being underneath him, I mean, Cyril Gane, he kind of laid down for him. But I mean, he was doing it. I mean, Machida. And I mean, he's got a solid choke game in transition. And that's something that Stipe's going to have to watch out for.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, and Gordon Ryan was a very big part of his camp. Very big part of his camp. So, yeah. I mean, the Jon Jones of the no-gi grappling world was coaching Jon Jones in no-gi grappling. So,
yeah, it's gonna be an issue. I think that's gonna be the biggest issue for Stipe, is dealing with the grappling exchanges when they get longer. I'm sure Stipe's gonna be like, all right, get off me. But when they get a little bit longer, even in clinch situations, he's got to be careful.
So you think Jon's gonna be the one to initiate the wrestling?
Yeah. For sure. Jon is, I mean, we always talk about his IQ, but that's really IQ when you play all your cards equally.
Yeah.
And Jon plays all his cards equally. Like, he uses his length. And if there's a threat of you breaking that barrier of his length, he hits you with an elbow. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's a game changer. Now you don't want to come in no more. So then he stays on the outside. Then he shoots on you. And then now you're like, oh man, this guy's shooting on me from way out there. Now you're really confused. I think Jon looks to take Stipe down. And that's another thing too. Like, if he puts Stipe on his back, it's over. I'll say that. If he puts him on his back, it's over. If I'm Stipe, he might want to think about putting Jon on his back. Mm-hmm. Which he probably could do.
That was part of the reason why I asked the question, because part of me thinks that Stipe might look to be the one who initiates and therefore hopefully controls the grappling exchanges, because he doesn't. I mean, I'm definitely with you in that whoever's on top, the guy on the bottom is going to struggle. These are high level, heavyweight grapplers. And one thing I always point out when I'm calling like flyweight fights or any lighter weight, but especially like 35 and 25 on the men's side, your strength to weight ratio completely changes the game of grappling. Those guys can bench press each other, no problem. They can their butterfly hooks can fling each other off, no problem. That is not the case at heavyweight. These guys are big. And when they get on top of each other, even when they're very, very skilled, it's just a different problem to have to solve than it is in other weight classes.
Well, and plus, like, bigger guys don't have, bottom dexterity. Mm-hmm. They don't move their hips well. They're not very
That's
flexible
true.
with
Yeah.
their legs. Like
Yeah.
their legs don't really move all that well. I mean, honestly, like that's my biggest problem with grappling now. Is that when I was coming up as a fighter, I was a bottom player. Now I'm 200 pounds, and I'm like, I don't even.
You can't.
No, I'm not going on my back for nobody. I'm not going on my back for nobody. So I get it. Like when you're
Yeah.
a heavyweight, it's just very difficult to have a good bottom game. You just don't move as well. And then when you add that weight on top of them, it's
Yeah.
a wrap. And that's why I think. But here's why Stipe is going to have a harder time shooting first because of the distance game on the feet. John keeps it at such a far distance. Stipe is not going to be comfortable shooting from so far out. So
So do you
I
think it's
think.
a matter of Stipe trapping him somehow? Like pushing forward aggressively, like the way that Dominic Reyes does, somehow getting him on the back foot, which again, Reyes did that for a couple rounds. I mean, it's funny that when you talk about Jon Jones, you can't even talk about this fight where things didn't go well. They're like, well, there was this one moment where he looked human, so let's talk about that.
Well, most people think that you have to push them up against the fence to keep them from being able to move away from you to corral them into a takedown situation. I don't necessarily believe that, but in fact, I don't believe that at all, actually. So I'm going to be completely frank here. I don't believe that at all. But 99% of people in MMA believe that. So no one really works on taking shots from the open.
Matt, yeah.
So I doubt. I mean, I'm hoping that someone can get creative enough and go, all right, this is we're going to take some shots from the open against John, but I don't believe that no one will. Um, and that's to me, the part of the downfall and part of the reason why people can't get to him because they're not creative enough to find openings in the open in the center of the
Hmm.
cage to take a shot on him.
Let me run through some numbers while we have a slight pause in our conversation, and then we can pick it up on the back end because I got some questions for you in terms of how you think this is going to go. Let's talk about these numbers, guys. Jon Jones, 21 and 1 with one no contest. Let's just call it what it is, essentially 23 and 0. 6'4" for Jon Jones, 6'4" for Stipe. I don't know where I got 6'6" from. 14 and 4 is Stipe's UFC record with 9 knockouts, so pretty good, pretty hefty knockout right there. They have listed the last weigh-in weight for Jon Jones as 248 and Stipe as 240. I think that we're going to see Jon come in lighter than we did in his last fight. I think that's something that we should discuss here in a second. We said a second ago, 4.5 inch reach advantage for Jon Jones. Another factor, Jon is 37, Stipe is 42. In terms of their knockdown average, Stipe actually has a higher knockdown average. He's the more powerful puncher overall. Striking accuracy for Jon Jones, 57.9%, 53.3% for Stipe. Strikes landed per minute, 4.29 for Jon, 4.8 for Stipe, those are fairly healthy clips for heavyweights. Defense for Jon, 64.3%, 54.6 for Stipe. Pretty high for both of them, honestly, but Jon has a nice lead there. And honestly, there's nothing all the way down the line that sticks out as being vastly different from one another. Obviously, Jon's takedown defense, we all know, is near perfect. It's 95% to Stipe's 68.4%, and that certainly could be something. Takedown average per 15 minutes is actually pretty close. 1.93 for Jon, 1.86 for Stipe. Stipe has 7 knockdowns in the UFC. Jon has 5 knockdowns in the UFC. But the difference maker here is that Stipe has been knocked down 5 times and Jon has never been knocked down. So, some interesting numbers for you there. Let's talk a little bit about the size of these guys and do we think it's going to matter? I do think it's very interesting that Jon is coming in lighter to this heavyweight fight, or at least seems to be. We don't know yet. We haven't obviously weighed in, but there was a post the other day that he was, what was it, 234, I think?
Really?
And he looked in person to be leaner than when I saw him on TV. And now I guess I did see him in person then against Cyril, but it's been a while, obviously. He looked, I guess to me, not bloated at all.
Mm.
Didn't have his shirt off, but that would have been weird.
But you can kind of tell, right?
But
You
you
can
can
kind of
kind of
tell.
tell. You can kind
You
of
kind of
tell.
tell almost.
If he is coming in lighter, which he seems to be, I think that's an interesting tell on maybe how he felt in his last fight. Would you agree with that?
Well, how he felt going into the last fight, perhaps, because he
Yeah.
didn't actually get to fight long enough to have enough the effects of being a heavier guy.
Yeah.
But I think that John, he's a lean guy, like he's a long individual. Like he has to play to those strengths. Like when you're a long individual, think of a wide receiver. Like you want to be able to have that type of agility and mobility of a wide receiver. And I think John fights better that way. Like we can use his length, he can create better angles,
Mhm.
and he needs to be kind of light. And if he came in at 230, I'm like, yeah, I'm here for it. I'm good with that. Like I like that. Like if he comes in too heavy, to me that would be a problem. And I think that may be, I mean, he might have felt that before, like, oh, thank God I got this over fast. Because if I had
Yeah.
to fight a long time, this might have been a problem for me.
That's kind of what I'm hinting at. It's kind of I tend to think that that maybe is what happened. And Stipe is also not the heaviest heavyweight on the roster. He's kind of a 245-ish, 250-ish type of guy. So he probably feels like, okay, I can give up 15, 20 pounds and that's not really going to be a factor for me. Whereas when we were having discussions about him, potentially fighting Francis or how big is Cyril? I can't remember.
Cyril's pretty big.
Cyril's pretty
He
big.
was probably 260.
Push to 260. Yeah. So I would imagine your first time at heavyweight, you're going up against a real deal heavyweight. You'd probably think in your mind, man, like I can't come in there any lighter than, 240 or this
Yeah,
is not going to be good.
and that was his first time, so I'm sure it was very experimental.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he experimented with that, and then he realized that I think he just wanted to feel good when he fought.
Yeah.
And that's key. That is the most important consideration that you can have.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to feel good when I'm out there. Like I want to be able to perform to the best of my ability, and feeling good helps. And I think that he probably took that into consideration throughout camp to manage his weight so that he could feel good on Saturday night.
How soon into the fight? We should do like a little over under prop bet here. How soon into the fight are we going to see the old 12 to
The
6?
old 12-6
Can I
elbow.
tell you, it was so funny listening to you the last week. Jon Joneser! Jon
I was
Joneser!
like,
Throw the Jon Jones!
again, I was just so happy to see him there. But it worked out perfectly. I was like,
And
hit him
she
with the
did
Jon
it. Of
Jones.
course, we're talking about Jillian Robertson. She did it
Yeah.
too, just like whack. Oh, thing of beauty.
Yeah, I was just so happy to see John there that I was like, yo, I gotta pay homage,
Yeah.
I gotta pay homage. But that's gonna be interesting because it might not apply, right? 12-6 elbows, like everybody's so up in arms about them, but think about it. It only two people really used them the entire night, right? Like not many people really got a chance to apply them because it's not that much of a game changer in the fight game because it still has to be in a
You gotta be
position.
in mount or near a
Yeah, you got to be in mount, or if you're in guard and you have a long torso against somebody with a short torso, where you can go head over head, it works.
which it might
But
appear.
yeah, well, it would work for Stipe if he's on
Yeah.
top of John, right? But
Yeah.
if John's on top of Stipe's torso is so far away that his head's going to be so far away that it
Oh,
won't
that's true.
apply if
Got
he's
that
in
long
guard.
torso. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and other situations like on the feet, the 12-6 might not apply because you're going to hit him in the back of the head. So it's not going to, it doesn't apply as much as we think it does.
I just want him to throw it and then like
Yeah, and give a little wink.
Little.
Yeah, if he throws it, he's got to do like a pro wrestling gesture, like a
Right?
whoop, whoop, whoop.
Something.
Bam!
Yes. Wind up into it. Something. All right. okay, before we shut this discussion down, because we have to go here. Well, before we do that, how do you think this fight's going? Paint me a picture.
I'm gonna paint a picture. I think sometimes it matters who's fighting in terms of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And when you got Jon Jones and Stipe fighting, it doesn't have to be fully exciting for everybody to still be at the edge of their seats. Now, unless it's like a real snooze fest, like unless it's a unless it's a Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis. I mean, and they had the opportunity, like they could have did the first round like that, but unless it's like that, it doesn't have to be that exciting, and we'll still be into it. So while I say that, I'm not sure it's going to be that exciting the whole way through, but we'll be fooled into it being exciting because it's Jon Jones and Stipe. But I do think that Jon's going to slowly but surely build a lead and then go downhill with it and probably stop Stipe somewhere third, fourth round. And then first couple of rounds, like if there was anybody else, it wouldn't be all that exciting. Mm-hmm. But because it's them two, we're going to be in it. Like every punch that's thrown, we're going to, oh my God.
You think they're both going to be pretty conservative in the beginning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about mature professionals.
Yeah.
They're not going out, like two guys on the prelims in their first fight.
They're not going out like the entire prelims card of last weekend where
no, they're not.
Every single fight was finished.
They're not going out like Chuck Buffalo Radke.
That was crazy. Okay, let's talk about the future then, real quick before we wrap this up. So there's so many different scenarios to paint here. Okay, so Jon wins. What happens next? Do you think is the most likely outcome?
The most likely outcome that if Jon wins is that he fights Alex Pereira, who's going to be all for it. And honestly, as much as I hate to say it, I mean, that's the fight that MMA deserves right now. It really, it's not the fight that makes the most sense. And it's not the fight that I'm sure Tom Aspinall wants to hear, but that's really the fight that makes most sense for the world of combat sports. I mean, it really does.
I'm so on the fence about this, about whether I completely agree with you or if I'm going to be a purist. And because I'm such an Aspinall fan that here's the argument I'll make to the contrary. And we're probably going to hash this out again on the weigh-in show anyway. I don't think it affects Jon Jones's legacy one iota if he goes out and fights Tom and loses and then retires.
It doesn't.
It doesn't change it. It doesn't change it.
But you can't convince him of that.
You're right. You're right. But it's like I would rather you give me everything that you had then you hold on to your shiny perfection and ride off into the sunset. It's kind of like there's a little part of me as a fan that holds that against Khabib, like in a respectful way, but like you could have given us more, right? You don't owe it, but like we could have gotten more out of Khabib, and we're kind of sad that like we didn't really get to see the full entirety of his capabilities. If Jon fights Tom and loses, we got to see the entirety of his capabilities, and it was unprecedented, never to be repeated again. End of story, period, over. What a beautiful ending. Way to pass the torch. That's what you do as a champion. You allow the guy coming up behind you the moment to become his greatness. And it's all beautiful. We all hold hands, and we all sing Kumbaya, and we all say, love you, Jon, you were great. The greatest. No?
That was very poetic, but it's not going to happen because at the end of the day, Jon a brother, you know what I'm saying? And a brother going to shine. You give a brother a fast break, what are you going to do? You think he's going to lay it up? No, he going to slam dunk it. He going to do a 360 slam dunk. That's what brothers do. Jon a brother, man. You give Jon an opportunity, He's going to try to shine on all his opportunities. And the easiest way for him to shine right now is to beat the darling of the UFC, and that is Alex Pereira, because that's what he's going to do, man. He's not going to put his heart and soul on the line because he wants to prove that he was a real tough guy. John is not a blue collar worker. Stipe would do that. Stipe like, yeah, it's trying to prove to the world I'm from Ohio, blue collar. No, John is not that. John is going to go, hey, listen, give me the ball. I'm gonna dunk it. That's what he's gonna do. I'm gonna do a 360 dunk. That's just the type of athlete John is. And can I fault? I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but I'm just saying that's the path I think he's gonna take.
And I guess that's where we have to just let it live inside of us, because I don't, is either of them wrong or right?
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like we can't like
I
it
don't know
just
that you can
depends.
make a moral
Yeah,
judgment on
it
like that's
depends
the
on how
wrong
you
way to
grew up.
handle it, you know?
Yeah, it depends on how you grew up.
Yeah.
Depends on who your influences were when you grew up. You know, if your influence was Cool Hand Luke, your name is Stipe Miocic. You know what I'm saying? That's him. He gonna take his beating and keep coming. But John ain't gonna do that. John gonna play his cards right and look good. So and I'm okay with that. You know, that's
Yeah.
John.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
When
you,
you're that good and when you're that good and you have that option,
yeah.
you can do it. Like a lot of people used to criticize Floyd Mayweather for having good defense, but you can't criticize him for having good defense when you don't have that good a defense and have the option to do it.
Yeah.
Like if you have the option to do it and then choose not to, I give you your props. But if you're not good enough to have the option to do it, you can't criticize the person who's good enough that's doing it.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. So in 20 years, when we're talking about Jon Jones, or whoever's talking about Jon Jones, and in scenario A, he has fought Tom and potentially lost. And that the fact is he could beat Tom. Like I don't know why we keep assuming that if he fought Tom, it's not going to go well. Like that's a that's a 50-50 fight in my mind. Of course, I might feel differently after this, but that's we haven't seen this yet. So, in scenario A, he fights Tom and maybe loses. Scenario B, he fights Pereira and wins. The people of a generation from now, are they gonna talk about him any differently either way?
No,
No.
because both of those fights will just be secondary to his entire catalog of what he's accomplished in his career. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about a guy who we said it earlier. If we started off with 16 title fights. Like that is the only thing that matters in his career. Like these single fights won't matter in his career. We won't look back at his career and go, oh yeah, Dominic Reyes might have beat him. We won't look back in his career and go,
Yeah.
Anthony Smith could have took the belt from. We're just going to be like, this dude fought 16 times in
Hmm.
title fights. That's crazy.
And
Yeah, it doesn't
we
matter.
get to see it. We get to see it this weekend, and I'm incredibly, incredibly excited for it. All right. Before we wrap this up, we got to get to our fan submission.
Oh,
Okay.
let's see this.
So let's take a look.
All right then, Din Thomas. I know you always use one-on-one to give the most outrageous picks possible, so I wouldn't be surprised if you go for Stipe on this one. You know neither of these guys have fought in a long time. Is this going to be a battle of the legends that we all want, or is it going to be disappointingly cautious?
I think I did it.
Yeah, you did it,
Is
George.
this going to be the fight that we want, or is it going to be disappointingly cautious? And by the way, apparently you give outrageous takes, and I agree with George.
I never thought
Good
that.
job,
Do I
George.
do it? No, no. No, I think it's like I said earlier, it's going to be cautious for a while, and then but it will deliver. Like
Yeah.
overall, the fight will deliver, but it will be cautious early.
The feeling that it gives you will be the feeling that you want it to have given you, but you might,
It'll take a while to get there.
it'll just take a minute, but at the end, we're going to be happy that we watched this.
And plus, the just the idea of watching Jon Jones at Madison Square Garden is enough.
He has never fought in New York. I didn't know that.
He's never fought in New
He's
York.
never fought in New York.
Wow.
Ever. And
Yeah.
Brandon Gibson said that they had a moment years and years and years and years and years and years and years ago, before MMA was even legal in New York, where they stood outside Madison Square Garden and thought, wouldn't it be great to fight there one day? Doesn't that just feel magical?
Yeah, that does feel magical. I hope that they like capture that some way.
No, I
Like
know.
Brandon could capture that some way and be like, remember when we stood out here? I don't know. I don't know.
I
Maybe I'm
love stuff like that.
fantastical. Yeah.
I love stuff like that. Dean, thank you so much for your time. As always, I appreciate you so, so much. We appreciate you having you on here. And guys, ton more videos. We've got the co-main event for UFC 309. Check out these other videos here. Click like, click subscribe. It helps us so much, and we'll see you next time.